Ladies and gentlemen, I want to start the news hour tonight with a stern warning that India has sent out to China after 3 of our braves were martyred by stones and iron rods in the Galwan Valley by Chinese troops. The Ministry of External Affairs, in its official statement just a short while ago, has called out China's bluff. It has said that, and I quote, China departed from the consensus to respect the line of actual control in Ladakh. This, remember, even while de-escalation was happening. The MEA statement says that it was the Chinese side that unilaterally changed the status quo in the Galwan area. The government confirming China's role in the violence, saying that both sides suffered casualties that could have been avoided had the agreement at the higher levels been scrupulously followed by China. The Indian side also went on to say that none of our troops indulged in any activity in a territory that was foreign, reiterating that Indian braves did not breach the line of actual control, as the Chinese media has been pointing out and calling India the aggressor since morning. Most importantly, the government has sent out a strong message to the Dragon, saying India and its forces were committed to ensuring India's sovereignty and territorial integrity, even at a time when it had favored dialogue for a long time. They were not going to back down from their position of protecting India's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So, ladies and gentlemen, on the case tonight, I want to tell you the sequence of events and the vicious betrayal that came from China, because of which we have lost our braves, and the number may not be limited to just 3. It all started after diplomatic channels called for immediate de-escalation along the line of actual control and in the Galwan area in Ladakh, so that the Chinese troops were retreating after these talks. About 850 Indian troops on this side, and probably an equal or more number of troops from the Chinese side were actually on the spot, and India was only seeing off the receding Chinese side. At this point, a Chinese unit just turned back and attacked the Indian commanding officer. The attack was made with iron rods and stones, and the Chinese army men were at a height, and they started throwing rocks and stones along the slope, and this then became a full-blown hand-to-hand scuffle which took place. Even though there was no use of bullets, violence erupted, and the Chinese PLA attacked Indian braves excuse me, with rods and stones, so much so that it led to the death of 3 of our braves, some of whom also fell into the river nearby. The sub-zero temperatures also led to the escalation of our casualties. We have been told by top sources that this altercation went on from the evening to almost midnight yesterday. Sources have also told us that the number of casualties may rise as a few injured soldiers fell into the river and may perhaps not survive the extreme cold temperatures. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is how vicious China has been on ground in the Galwan Valley. And the only legitimate question we're asking tonight is, will China pay for Galwan betrayal? That's the question and the debate. China must pay. Coming up on the other side.
You're watching the News Hour at 9. Debate number 1 on Times Now. Super Prime Time.
And joining me this evening, General VP Malik, former Army Chief, Dr. Shambit Patra, National Spokesperson of the BJP, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, author, Maroof Raza, Group Consulting Editor of Times Network, Meera Shankar, former Indian Ambassador to the United States, Pawan Verma, former diplomat and ex-member of Parliament, Professor P. Stotan, Strategic Affairs Expert, Bharat Karnad, and Dr. Suman C. Raman. My first question goes to General VP Malik. And General VP Malik, I want to ask you this. What do you think is the position at this moment where China has acted in such a vicious manner, virtually attacking the Indian army and violating every agreement that was undertaken on both sides through the diplomatic channels that had been open. Despite these agreements, hasn't China reneged on its position, on its promise, on its agreement with the Indian side?
At the moment, it looks either a betrayal or a deliberate attempt by the Western Command of PLA, which does not want to accept the de-escalation or disengagement of troops. So it is either a deliberate attempt not to accept that, or there is some kind of a misunderstanding which has not been, that PLA forces have not been able to convey to their troops on the ground.
Well, do you think, Maroof, Raza, this could be a misunderstanding? Because the Chinese troops, unlike any professional army, was armed with iron rods and rocks that they may have picked up from the slopes of the hillocks there. I want to ask you, is this the manner in which any professional army actually behaves? Iron rods used on the commanding officer?
Well, Navika, I've been saying this since last week, but more importantly, since this morning, that the Chinese always work to a plan. This is part of a plan that was hatched by military commanders. At what level, I cannot tell. But as General Malik rightly brought out, they have this newly reorganized Western Theatre Command, which really looks at all engagements with India, right from the Karakoram Pass, right towards the McMahon Line's end and beyond towards Myanmar. And the commanders there have clearly instructed the troops, as was brought out in several other discussions, that China follows a strategy of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So when they have taken 2 steps forward, they then, after talking and appearing to be the nice guy, which the Chinese media is painting its troops that we did not escalate, but they did escalate because they came into areas they have never been in before, like the Galwan Valley. These areas were clearly with India, have been with India from the very beginning, and most specifically after 1962, by when China had firmed up its hold on the Aksai Chin area, alongside which runs the line of actual control, which was put into motion from 1993-96, the arrangements between India and China. And that is more or less where it is. The point to understand is China is working towards a bigger strategic option. The bigger strategic option is they have always eyed the Galwan Valley, an area north of that, which leads beyond Galwan Valley northwards towards the Daulatbeg Oldie airfield, and then the Karakoram Pass, and to link up with the territory that Pakistan gave to them in March 1963, which is known as the Shakskam Valley. That was a strategic masterstroke by Pakistan. China wants that area, and beyond that, all the areas which make the valleys of the Indus, including the plains of Ladakh, because China is obsessed with controlling the waters of that area, both for using it as a resource and using it to build microchips, because fresh water is required for that, and that's what they're funding dams in what we call POK. But now to understand why the troops were carrying only rods with nails on them, clearly they were trying to show that in principle they are following this whole charade of not firing at each other, as has been brought out in many other discussions. The last time that Indian and Chinese troops really fiercely engaged each other with weapons was at Nathula in 1967. And after a massive punch onto them by General Sagat Singh and his troops, the Chinese pulled back. Again, there was another military engagement that almost became a big event, but it was curtailed because the Chinese pulled out. When General Sundarji, seeing Chinese encroachments and waiting for diplomatic talks to reveal something, and saw nothing revealed after that, encircled the Chinese with about 2 brigades worth of heli-lifted
So
troops.
are you saying, Maroof, Raza, that this time too the options are narrowing down for India? And I want to get in Meera Shankar. Meera Shankar, do you think the options have narrowed down for India after an agreement when this is the way the Chinese army has behaved in a vicious manner? Is there reducing room for engagement at a dialogue level? Do you think there will have to be other options on the table? How do you see this entire situation?
Well, firstly, I think we have moved troops there, and the government has given authorization to the local army commanders to take whatever action they deem fit to show India's strength in the region. So basically, we are not going to be a pushover. And secondly, we have the MEA statement has also said that India will take whatever steps are necessary to safeguard its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Clearly, I think we have to look at broader options. One is the military option, where that is the first thing, that you have to be in a position where you can face up to the Chinese with strength, because China respects power. It does not respect pleading, please do this, please do this. So you have to be able to stand up to China before you will be in a position to even get a kind of disengagement through negotiations. Secondly, you need to keep your negotiations going, because we also don't want to escalate the conflict in a manner which becomes unmanageable. And but going beyond that, you have to look at what are the diplomatic choices before you, because there is a huge gap, power gap, between India and China, economically, technologically, and in the military field. And this gap is only growing given China's growing power. The Chinese are choosing this moment when the world is preoccupied with the COVID crisis. The US is also preoccupied with its race riots and coming presidential elections, to basically up the ante with all its neighbors. So you've seen with Australia, they have threatened them with economic sanctions and actually imposed economic sanctions, with Taiwan, with Hong Kong, where they've extended their own security to Hong Kong. So you can see in the South China Sea, where China has added the South China Sea area as a district of China recently, and has had face-offs with Vietnam, Malaysia, and Philippines, or small skirmishes. So you can see that China is signaling to all its neighbors that, they think that the transition from a US-dominated power structure in Asia to a Chinese-dominated power structure in Asia is going to happen, and their neighbors are being put on notice. The other reasons for this, and of course, the reasons are not so valid, it's what we do in the face of the actual position on the ground.
We're getting some breaking news coming in at this moment. The latest update from the Army headquarters is that this is an unprecedented situation. There is a meeting that's on at the highest decision-making level. So only when that finishes will we have a fresh statement from the Army. So we'll have to be on standby for a while longer. And let me get in Mr. Pavan Verma. Mr. Pavan Verma, you've been an observer of these situations. Do you think the manner in which China seems to be moving in a predetermined manner, what they're doing with Australia, with the South China Sea, with Taiwan, as Meera Shankar pointed out, the fact of the matter is, even while they are talking with India on de-escalation, this is how the Chinese troops have behaved, which is carrying iron rods with them, something that no professional army would have done. So even if there are no bullets that are fired, the fact of the matter is that this is double speak, and this is as as slimy as it gets from the Chinese side?
No, thank you, Navika, and my condolences to those who have lost their lives, their families. But I want to say to you, the title of your program today is China Must Pay. China will not pay, and I will seek 60 seconds from you uninterrupted time. China will never pay vis-a-vis India if there is not a paradigm change in our deferential policy towards China. And perhaps this incident can provoke us to understand that we need to deal with China differently. Ironically today, Navika, in a leading national newspaper, there is a column by a former national security advisor, Mr. M.K. Narayanan, which actually argues that India should not provoke China, that China is upset by India's membership of the quadrilateral arrangement with Japan, Australia and the United States. We should bear that in mind. China should not accept Donald Trump's invitation to come to an expanded G7 because China is not a member of it and China may mind. China doesn't want India and US to come so close, so we should remain non-aligned. Now, it is this kind of policy, Navika, which has all the time kept India from understanding one basic truth. Pakistan is a relatively minor public nuisance on the sidelines. Our substantial strategic opponent is China in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term. If we don't understand this, Chanakyan India doesn't understand this. Just listen to me for another 30 seconds. China is in cahoots with Pakistan against India. China is occupying Indian territory. China is building a road, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, through our territory. China blocks our membership of the NSG. China blocks UN designation as a terrorist for Masood Azhar. China treats the South China Sea as its backyard, not a global commons. China actually, during the state visit of President Xi Jinping in September 2014, makes a major incursion into Chumar. And now my worry is, and these are my final points, you see, China does not want India to upgrade its border infrastructure. The provocation did not happen last night. Unfortunate consequences happened. The moment we began to build the Darbuk Shok Daulat Beg Oldie Road as a sign of our upgrading our border infrastructure to match China's abilities, China wants once again to assert its superiority. And my worry further is that there has already been occupation of territory which is part traditionally of India, even if the LAC is not finally demarcated. That penetration into Indian territory held traditionally by us at the Pangsong So Lake, at the Galwan Valley, at the Hot Springs Gogra area in Ladakh, all of them, and at Nakula in Sikkim has happened. Now we must come forward and understand that China has beefed up its military presence further along the LAC after these incursions.
Point taken, but let me get in Anand Ranganathan. Anand Ranganathan, the Global Times has quoted the Western Theatre commander and has said that China always owns sovereignty over the Galwan Valley region. So they've already come out and begun to dispute that Galwan Valley, which is Indian territory, is now theirs. And this is the mouthpiece of the Chinese, which quotes the Western Theatre commander stating this. So clearly when they say that Galwan Valley region, which is Chinese sovereignty, and the Indian border defense troops are inconsistent with their words and seriously violating agreements of both countries and consensus made during the army commander level talks and harm the relations of the two militaries. So all along, statement number one, that India was the aggressor. Statement number two, that Galwan Valley is actually Chinese territory. I want to ask you, can we ever trust the Chinese? Isn't it something that we've learned in the past But is this the India of 1962 that China is expecting to engage with?
Yeah, good evening, Navika. No, we can't trust the Chinese. And of course, this is not the India of 1962. We're not going to back down. But, you know, this is a terrible day. And my sincere condolences to the bereaved families. We are paying an awful price for China's gamesmanship to change the narrative, where, as other panelists have also suggested, from Hong Kong to Taiwan to Europe to Australia to the US, the whole world wants revenge from China for devastating world health and economy. Of what I know, this was an unprovoked attack by a Chinese patrol and totally unconnected to the de-induction talks that were going on smoothly. And they came, as you said, with iron rods. We retaliated, we didn't back down, and there are casualties on both sides. You must understand that we have a disputed boundary with China thanks to the Brits, and this LAC runs 3,500 kilometers, even through lakes and mountains. Infiltrations, inductions are common given the badly demarcated border. But the sad part, Navika, is that since 2014, every such conflagration is blown up to mock and bring down Modi and India. To bring down Modi is still okay, do it. But to bring down India is treachery. The Congress and the communists and their chamchas and gamchas have transmogrified their hatred for Modi into hatred for India. Are we going to listen to the Congress that has traditionally kowtowed, a Mandarin word by the way, to China, from Rajiv blanking out coverage of Tiananmen massacre, to Rahul meeting the Chinese ambassador during Doklam, to maintaining complete silence when China occupied 640 square kilometers of eastern Ladakh during the UPA, as disclosed by the UPA Foreign Secretary Sham Saran? To look the other way, when between 2010 and 2013, China made nearly 600 incursions into the Indian side. Or are we going to listen to the Indian communists who zipped their blood-red lips on Chinese concentration camps that house more than 1 million Uyghur Muslims, who forbade anyone from setting up blood donation camps for our Jawans during the 1962 Indo-China war, who worshipped Mao despite knowing the murdered 63 million of his own people? No, we are not. We will listen and pay heed to our armed forces because they save us, not electoral seats. They defend us, not China.
That's right. And Suman C. Raman, let me get you in. Professor Bharat Karnad and Professor Stobda, and I'm coming to you. But Suman C. Raman, I want to ask you. What is the efficacy of putting out 7 questions by the Congress to the government today? I want to ask you, Suman C. Raman, is that what a responsible opposition does? I mean, do you want to turn everything politically in India so that the government first answers the opposition within the country before it can figure out, what is the next step forward with China? I want to ask you why this brinkmanship by the Congress party with 7 questions coming out from the Congress party at a time when India is looking at the situation which is currently occupying their attention. And I also want to ask you, if you want to point fingers at Modi, if that's your full-time occupation, then why don't you just recall to 2013, around this time of the year, May of 2013, when there were similar incursions? What happened to the Congress then?
Yeah, Navika, first of all, let us get this very clear. This is a national issue. There is no Congress, no BJP, no political party here. Everybody is united, and there is no question of looking at this from a political eye. Whatever the opposition parties have been raising, they have been speaking in the best interest of the country to know what has been going on. Because, look, in the case of Kargil happened when there was another NDA government. And the remarkable way in which the then Prime Minister, Mr. Vajpayee, handled the matter won universal acclaim. In fact, yes, there was initially a lapse when the intruders were allowed to occupy those heights. But within 3 weeks, Mr. Vajpayee had waged a diplomatic offensive. The whole world said Pakistan was the aggressor. And thereafter, it became much easier for India to work the diplomatic channels effectively. Here, for 7 weeks, We have not.
All right,
got
I'm
an
getting
official
breaking news
statement.
coming in. Our casualty has been put at 20 people. We've lost 20 soldiers. This may increase. Statement is delayed, but casualty figures are confirmed to be about 20. May increase. This is what we've got from the army headquarters. If we can just put out that breaking news plate, and 20 casualties are being confirmed by the army. 20 of these soldiers have been martyred. This may increase. That's the level at which the casualty level has been put out. Statement from the army has been further delayed, but 20 casualties is what we are being told. Let me get in Professor P. Stopdon, strategic affairs expert who is in Ladakh. Professor, what's the information that you're getting from your sources, and what does it look like from here on? Is India in a position only to diffuse the situation through talks at the military level, or are there other options that will need to be looked at, realistically speaking?
I think this is not a border clash. Beyond border clash, that is what I understand now. And the situation is extremely bad on the Galwan side. And it's a clear case of deceit and deception by the Chinese. When everything was agreed upon on the 6th of June, why this? So there is a question mark. One can argue that, yes, both sides have not taken the disengagement process seriously. It was left to the micromanagement at the lower level commanders. So it's, at that level, things have not been handled properly. This could be one reason. Other reason is that the Chinese are well prepared to escalate it. And I believe that the Chinese have well-planned strategy to escalate it. It is happening. The other strategic issues have been covered by most of the speakers here now. But the immediate strategic provocation was, it comes day after Nepalese parliament passed that bill. Number two, the Pakistani top brass is meeting today. So I don't think Chinese will escalate, but all these countries are trying to gang up now, try to portray India in a very negative light. This is what I see the immediate goal of the Chinese are. And beyond that, there is still a scope. I'm a little bit scared now because the casualties have crossed double digit. And this is a worrying sum. It can go anyway now. We can't lying low, can't be lying low. So therefore, I think the government is quite determined, I suppose, because I see a lot of, the laborers and trucks moving towards the border with a lot of laborers coming from Jharkhand. The construction is continuing to Galwan Valley. And therefore, and at the same time, the Chinese are not moving away from the other side and the Pangong Lake. So therefore, I think anything could happen now onwards. High-level political diplomatic intervention is required. I believe that window now has to be open. Otherwise, there is always a risk of further escalation.
Well, Bharat Karnad, have we miscalculated by depending on Chinese to agree on what they had promised in their talks?
Look, if you believe the Chinese, then you have a real problem. No matter what party is in power, it seems India ends up being a sucker. It acts like a Boy Scout, believing whatever paper agreements the diplomats agree on. The fact of the matter is the Chinese have a definite plan, they work to further it, and no nonsense about it. In our case, we just have some idea about the LAC that we are not willing to advance, meaning that we leave it to negotiating and jaw-jawing and hope that this will eventually result in some kind of a resolution of the dispute. It doesn't work that way as far as the Chinese are concerned. Look at what they have done by way of the Galwan occupation. They've done so. And here, let me be a bit critical about our own side, because it's all very well to blame the Chinese. But we have had the satellite imagery for many, many years, showing the ongoing construction and build-up on the Chinese side. When they have intruded, built up, and presented the Indian side with territorial fait accompli. That happens all the time. So they keep realigning the LAC. We keep accepting the new LACs, and very soon they'll realize by these so-called peaceful means all their claims all across the LAC. And this is the real problem. The fact of the matter is, and Galwan will have to, however you look at it, are you willing to play hardball or not? It doesn't seem we are willing to play hardball. What does that require? It requires the Indian government to tell Beijing and the Xi regime that if you do not vacate the Galwan Valley that you have intruded into and set up encampments in, we will deny you complete access to the Indian market. That will also address the problem of the trade deficit imbalance of some $70-odd billion. This is the kind of hardball. Are you willing to play it? We seem to be under the impression that they'll eventually invest something in infrastructure. They're not idiots, for God's sake. When they have the CPEC there, why would they invest in India when they have all the other countries to invest in, who then become their puppets? India is too large to become their puppet, but we do not have the gumption, it seems to me, or the will and the endurance to stand up to them. And this is why we are being pushed. The LAC willy-nilly is being pushed Indiawards all these years. And we do nothing about it. All we do is rely on the diplomats and the MEA to somehow further, or the special representative talks to somehow resolve the dispute. It's not going to happen. They have the disparity in military terms. They are far superior to us. So what are you going to do? That's why I've been saying that somewhere down the line you have to lay down your stakes, which is, first of all, show your intent, the serious intent you have of protecting your territorial integrity by saying, well, this is the line, and any ingress into and beyond it into India will be taken seriously. And therefore, I have advocated things like atomic demolition munitions. Some very serious hardballing is required.
A serious line and a deterrent line will have to be taken. But Dr. Sambit Patra, I want to ask you that there is a timeline that the opposition is talking about. Former Home Minister, former Finance Minister, Mr. P. Chidambaram, in his tweet has asked that if this scuffle or so-called violent attack between the two sides happened between dusk and midnight last night, it's been a long time. The first statement came in from the army at around 12:52, which was updated at 1:08, and since then one statement from the MEA. Do you think it's time to brief the country on exactly what are the terms of engagement and how many of our men have been martyred?
Navika, a caveat before I begin. The caveat is I cannot go into a zone of speculation. I, as a spokesperson of the political party which is in power and center, cannot speculate and go astray. I have to be confined to the limits of what the government has already declared or is declaring presently. Secondly, as far as the government's announcement is concerned, I'll surely come to that. But my previous respected speaker, the one who was speaking right now, I'm a bit astonished. They say that China is quite superior. How do we deal with the superiority of China? Please, for God's sake, we have to get this out of mind. It's not that China is superior. We are a changed India today. We are no more India of 1962. We are a different India. We are also moving towards superpowerdom. To say that China is far superior and we stand somewhere else is absolutely a bunkum statement, number one. Number two, well, yes, we are a changed India in the way that, look, despite China opposing India-US's closeness, we are coming close. Despite China opposing, our relation with many other countries, we are coming close to them. Look at Australia, what it's doing with Australia. Despite the fact that India's economy runs through trade, etc., we have talked about Atmanirbhar Bharat. China may not like it, But India is standing on its feet, and China is being given some serious answers on this. Remember Doklam, 73 days. It was not just 1-2 weeks. It was 73 days that India stood the ground. And I was going to an op-ed in one of the most important newspapers, which said that it was because of India's patience and silence. While our silence was calculated, it was China which was speaking out, and our silence and our patience paid off finally. So, in fact, the strategies has to be different with China. The strategy has to be different with
absolutely,
with Pakistan.
Well said. Not going to contest that at any level, and India is capable of giving its responses. And the man who did it in Kargil, General VP Malik. General VP Malik, what's happened at the LAC? Do you think a further escalation, which has been kept at bay for the last several years, several decades, in fact, is that something that could be the only option, or do you think India can use a different strategy to tackle China? And as Dr. Sambit Patra says, it took 73 days to defuse Doklam. It can still be done, and the Indians have the reserve energy to show that militarily they are not weak, and strategically they will have the upper hand.
Look, I don't think it is in the interest of either China or India to escalate the whole issue and get involved in escalating the whole issue. So I think what is going to happen more likely is that it will take position from both sides till they get orders from their senior officers to disengage. I don't think they will get into another position of a scuffle. So they will have to stay away from each other and gradually withdraw after they receive the orders. But then I don't think it is going to work only at military level. Now the message has to go to Chinese at the diplomatic or political level.
But General VP Malik, the issue many would be thinking at this time, that is India prepared to take on a power like China?
I don't think this whole thing is going to escalate on an all over the border all over. It's not going to be a war as such. Most probably, even if some firing takes place or it escalates, it is going to remain. I think it will remain localized.
Well, Meera Shankar, I want to get you in on this. Do you think it still has the potential to be a localized standoff, which can be resolved, as Dr. Patra says, through engagement, as Doklam was resolved? Is there a possibility of that still?
I think you would need a dual policy, a display of strength militarily on the ground, combined with diplomacy to show that we don't want to escalate the situation and are prepared to disengage. But at the same time, I think you need two other things. One is to build your own strength economically, technologically, and the lever that you have with China, as Dr. Karnad said, is largely economic, because China exports far more to us than we do. We mainly export natural resources, and we have a deficit of $50 to $60 billion with China at a time when China will be looking for export markets, because the US and Europe are perhaps not going to be buying from China to the extent they did. I think the Indian market would be important, and we have to learn to leverage this with China. Secondly, what are the kind of partnerships we need at the global level to balance China in Asia if there is a power gap in terms economically and otherwise? Then we need to see what we need to do with other global powers to create the kind of balance which could help to keep China.
And Anand Ranganathan, isn't that what every simple Indian really wants at this point? You know, this whole movement of boycott China that began. You think that is the economic response that needs to come in? Of course, not at a government level, but from the people of India, because this kind of double speak by China, this kind of stabbing in the back by China clearly is something that isn't going to go down well with the common man on the streets as well.
Yes, absolutely it isn't, and I think the previous speaker was absolutely bang on. I congratulate her for her alacrity. You know, the point, Navika, is yes, the border dispute is historical. It was handed to us by the Brits, as I said, McMahon line. You know, it's neither China's fault nor ours. And, you know, few skirmishes are all right, and they have been happening, you know, every day during the Youth Congress rule, during the BJP rule, it's fine. But this is serious. And, you know, why not just the public? I think it's the government that should now call for boycotting economically, you know, China economically. We export around $20 billion worth of goods to China. You know, that is about how much? 140,000 crores. We can, we can look at alternative countries. China is not a democracy. We have to hit it. We must realize that us not, having an economic partnership with China is good for the whole world. That is how you bring down dictatorships. That is how dictatorships learn a lesson. Unfortunately, this world, you know, doesn't realize this.
Maroof Raza, I want to ask you. General VP Malik made a point, and he said that, this will be a localized affair and it is not going to escalate. Well, that may be something that India wants, but do you think China will have the same desire at this point? Because they want to distract attention. They want to distract attention away from the blame game that's going on the COVID front, where many people many countries feel that China is the exporter of COVID in the first place, and then that it was late in informing the world, and that it played the WHO no less. All sorts of strategic realignments are happening in the world. So do you think China will stick to non-escalation as their goal and objective, and not try to target India, which is going to be the beneficiary of countries moving out of China as the manufacturing hub of the world?
Navika, that's a very good question. And in fact, in your question also lies some answers. The first thing is, while we can hope that this will remain a localized operation, there is always the possibility, as Ambassador Meera Shankar has brought out, that China is likely to poke you in various parts of the front line, which is not very clearly defined, particularly in Ladakh. When Mr. Ranganathan referred to the McMahon line, yes, that is a British legacy to it, but the McMahon line is beyond Sikkim and going towards Burma. It's on the eastern side. Here, the line was never agreed. There is confusion whether it is the Johnson line or the McCarthy line or the LAC that came into being after Narasimha Rao met Deng Xiaoping in 93-96, and thereafter we decided to use this term, but it is not formally agreed and demarcated. That's where the primary confusion lies. The second aspect to understand is that the Chinese do have large, formidable forces on paper, but when it comes to engaging with us on the border, and China has 14 countries with which it has borders, and it doesn't have good relations with most of them. So the forces that it can bring to bear here could always be countered by what military men call the revolving door strategy. If they have entered here, we should be able to enter another part of the boundary with China, and I'm not using the word border because the border as yet is not fully agreed upon, and tell them, you move from here, we move from there. There is also the possibility, and I believe as it was brought out, that there is satellite intelligence that has been available to us from so many weeks. We have not used that because I think there is, and pardon my saying so, and these people are my ilk, the military men, but I think at some levels, people have not been able to react as ruthlessly as they are asked to in their training courses. And I think there have been restraints that have been put on them. The classic example was of Nathula and then Sumdrongchu, where military commanders took it upon themselves to keep it tactically localized, but get on with it. Now, you've lost 20 men. I am not asking for a full-fledged conflict, but I don't think any commander on the ground there can face his men if he doesn't react when a commanding officer has been killed and other men have been killed. So please be prepared that this might escalate to levels where it will call for high-level talks, maybe even between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping.
Dr. Sambit Patra,
Navika,
India is absolute.
Navika, please let me make my last point. It is a very important point. Please understand this is 2020. This year, Xi Jinping had promised his people that he would double their GDP from 2010 levels onwards, and China would finally find its place in the world as the top nation to go to. The circumstances have changed because of COVID, economic downturn, and etc. This may be one of the areas where China is trying to reassert itself to find its own place in the geostrategic discussions of the world. There are countries that are looking at the West, which doesn't have time to attend to their issues, too busy fighting COVID inside. They are looking, developing countries where China has deep pockets too. They are looking at China to say, are you going to be my next leader? Because let's not delude ourselves to believe.
I'm sure at the highest levels, India realizes that game, and India clearly will have its eye on the strategic front, how to tame the dragon. But Dr. Sambit Patra, India is ready. This is India of 2020. It will make China pay.
See, Navika, as far as the 4 C's are concerned, I can assure you today on Times Now that the first C, Corona, we would get rid of Corona. Second C, China, we would de-escalate with China. And as far as 2 other C's within the country are concerned, the Congress and the Communists, they would be breathless because they would have no further oxygen to draw with these skirmishes that we are seeing today.
Well, Pavan Verma?
Navika, may I make a point?
Yes, sir.
I'll just say, loss of 20 lives marks a very serious situation, Navika. And while I appreciate Samvit's light-hearted comment about the 4 C's, I think it's time for India, irrespective of political parties, to learn how to deal with China, and it cannot be episodic, Navika. One Doklam, one Galwan Valley. China understands the language of strength. We need a coordinated strategy of beefing up our border infrastructure.
Very well said, Pavan Verma. Very well said, Pavan Verma. China understands engagement from a position of strength, and I don't think the India of 2020 is the India of 1962. India will engage, India will avenge the martyrdom of its braves, and India will respond as it is required, because our soldiers have it in them to respond to every provocation and to every setback, which is only going to be temporary, because it will be the Indian braves who will come up right on top. Well, thanking all my panelists on this debate. Going across to news that's coming from across the country all day today, which is important. As the race continues to find a COVID cure, Oxford researchers claim a major breakthrough. Say a low-cost drug called dexamethasone, when given to COVID-19 patients, reduces death rates by around a third among those with the most severe case of infection. That could be a new breakthrough that could solve problems on the COVID front. The Maharashtra government has ordered the BMC to clean up the COVID-19 data and report whatever discrepancies have been flagged off on this, and around 400 to 500 COVID-19 deaths that were missed have now been added to the Mumbai's death toll, and taking that death toll up today. The Delhi government has also won the legal battle against hotels being attached to hospitals to serve as COVID facilities. 2 hotels, including the landmark 5-star hotel Taj Mansingh, will now be converted into COVID wards. Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal visited one of the hotels to take stock and augment beds for patients amid a spike in infections. Also, Home Minister Amit Shah today held a review meeting with the authorities in Delhi to take stock of the fight. Another major attempt by the Election Commission to ensure free and fair elections. The poll panel in its commission meeting today has decided that reference of cases of omissions or modifications of details by netas to investigating authorities will take place by the Election Commission itself on a case-to-case basis. So far, the common man had to fight these cases in court. Now, the Election Commission will take a look and decide on complaints, on affidavits that have incorrect information. That's all on the News Hour tonight. With that, it's a wrap. Good night from me, Padmaja Joshi. Coming up next, don't go anywhere.